everybody, it is Dean Z speaking to you from room 100 at the University of Michigan Law School on a beautiful summer's day. Today, I want to talk to you about applying to law school when you are KJD. First, I will acknowledge I did an episode about this in season 1, episode 22, but the focus there was on should you or should you not apply when you're coming straight out of undergrad. Today, I want to assume that you are applying straight out of undergrad. How can you shine? How can you really bubble up to the top with whatever your set of experiences are? And also, if you are early on in your college career, what might you do to really position yourself as well as possible? So let's get started by first talking about what do I even mean by KJD. I mean someone who starts school in kindergarten, goes through high school, 12th grade, goes right into college, and then after 3 or sometimes even 2 years of college, you are applying to law school. Some people go, with thanks to AP credits and just really piling on the credits in undergrad, can actually graduate in 3 years. So sometimes we see people who are, 20 years old, applying to law school, ready to go. What I don't mean is someone who, graduates high school, maybe does something else, and then goes to college and applies to law school after that, or someone who goes to college but takes, an extended period to graduate because, of interruptions in their career, or, because they've been working or what have you. All of those are just sort of a different set of circumstances, and so I'm just talking about the very traditional straight through. I'll note that the term KJD is one that I think comes to us thanks to the internet. I have only recently sort of adopted it for my own use. I always used to say straight through, like you're coming straight through. That's the terminology I use, but KJD is what the kids are saying, so I'm trying to keep up. All right, so if you look at the data and what other schools are doing, what all the schools are doing, you will note at Michigan, it's about 20 to 25% of the class are coming straight out of undergrad. Other schools, it's similar. Some schools, it's 5 or 10% coming straight from undergrad. Some schools, it's maybe a third. But I think almost all law schools in 2024 have more than half of their class with a little bit of post-college work experience. So what's going on there? Is it that we're getting lots of applications and law schools just don't like them? Or is it that fewer are applying? Honestly, it's a little bit of both. It's not that we don't like them, but it is a heavier lift. So on the first hand, I should just emphasize that yes, we have more people applying to law school who've taken off a little time after college to work than we have people coming straight through. And the numbers are really reflecting that. But also, I just want to acknowledge it is a heavier lift, as I say, to apply straight from undergrad versus having work experience. Why is that? Let's say you are applying in your senior year of college. You have 3 years showing on your resume, because as a general matter, you shouldn't be dipping into high school on your law school application resume. You should just start with your freshman year in college. So you've got 3 years to showcase what you've done. You could include a little bit of what you're planning to do in your senior year of college, but really you got 3 years to work with here. So someone who's taken a year off to work has at least 25% more to show, if not a third, and or even 2/3 if they've taken a couple years. That much more time to work with, that much more content to demonstrate who they are and their readiness for law school. So you got to really be focused and smart about your application if you're K through JD. People do it all the time, but you got to know what you're doing. So let's focus on that. The biggest tool you have is going to be your resume. In general, I love the resume. I think it is the unsung hero of the application process. It has so much information jam-packed into it. In a page or two, I can get a really excellent, comprehensive snapshot of an applicant's life. So you want to put a lot of emphasis on your resume if you're K through JD. So your first task is to step back and think about everything you have done since entering college that might be something you could put on a resume. Sometimes people leave off jobs that they've had because they think, oh, they're not really law jobs, so nobody wants to see that. Bad mistake, don't do that. Sometimes people leave off their extracurricular activities because they're like, well, I only have one page to work with, so I won't put that. You really want to include your extracurriculars because otherwise all we know is what your grades were in college. You want, like, what you did in college is a big part of who you are if you're K through JD, right? So don't leave those off. I should pause here and note some schools are very clear, I only want a one-page resume. Some schools give you a little more wiggle room. If a school says one page, you got to stick with that and you got to make some hard editing choices. They give you a little more wiggle room. Take advantage of that space, okay? All right, what else should be included that sometimes gets left off? Extracurriculars, non-law jobs. Obviously, any internship should be on there, anything that looks like professional experience. So everything basically that you can think of should be on that resume, presumptively. And then how do you present it? You want to really focus on what are the law-related skills that I have developed and that I can showcase. So maybe that's your writing experience, maybe that's your research experience, maybe that's your teamwork or leadership. There's a lot of different skills that go into being a successful lawyer. Maybe you're good at presenting to groups. Maybe you're very good at one-on-one, connecting with people one-on-one. Think about what all the skills are. You know, do some Googling. I mean, I've given you a bunch here, but I'm thinking in sort of general terms, and you know what your skills are. So figure out what your skills are and how to, shape them into law-specific skills, and make sure you are presenting that information accordingly. So, you may think your moneymaker type of job, like my glorious career was at CVS as a cashier and also as a pharmacy technician. You may think that has nothing whatsoever to do with the law. That is not true. Law is a service profession. That's a service job. So think about highlighting your service experience. Maybe you've worked with a professor who has been very demanding. That is certainly relevant to the law. Think broadly and deeply and figure out in your description of a job how you can highlight words, include descriptions that will make you look law ready. One of the skepticisms or concerns or something that might give us pause as a admissions officer in a KJD application is also, have you thought about this enough, right? Are you applying to law school because you're on autopilot and it seems like the path of least resistance, or do you really want to go to law school? To that end, anything you've done to investigate the law should definitely also be in your resume, if at all possible. If not, make sure that someone who's writing you a letter of recommendation can refer to it, or that you can refer to it in an essay, but if possible, on the resume, showing anything law related. And if you've got, to be clear, that doesn't need to necessarily be a job. It could be a volunteer experience. It could be an extracurricular experience. But anything law-related needs to get highlighted so that I know this person's making a considered decision and really wants to be at the law school. As a practical matter, if I admit, 10 people who all decide into their first year, I don't want this. This is not what I thought it was at all. And then they drop out, that's a pretty big failure for me as an admissions officer. So admissions officers do not like to take risks about that. So you really need to emphasize that as a K to JD in a way that you don't necessarily if you've taken time off for work. Why? Because if you've taken time off from work, there's a little bit of friction there. You're already in the employment sphere. I know you're succeeding, you got a job, and you are choosing to pause that and go back to school. That to me just inherently speaks to someone who has put some thought in this in a way that, if you're going from school to school, it's much less friction filled, if that makes sense. Along these lines, got a great question from a watcher named Yang who wanted to talk about work experience for the KJD, especially given the new U.S. News ranking metric assigning more weight to employment. Get more into rankings in this future episode, but that is correct that there's less emphasis on admissions metrics and now more emphasis on full-time employment. He asks, Besides having a polished resume, how can we showcase employability? Should we talk about internship experience? Aside from the common skills like writing, researching, time management, etc., what are some important skills you don't think get highlighted enough? I think I've touched on that already in this episode, so I won't belabor that, but he's asking exactly the right questions. Like, how can I use every piece of the real estate in my application to show I am ready to go and I have put thought into this? Now, one thing that Yang asked that I want to emphasize, he asks, does it need to be law-related work? No, it does not. You do not need to have law-related work if you are applying KJD. But again, because of this concern that admissions officers might have that you haven't put thought into it, I think it is more beneficial for the KJD applicant to have law-related work than the person who's taking work experience. The person who's showing work experience, rather. That person has a lot of things that can demonstrate that they've been putting thought into this. Whereas the person coming KJD, that's going to be an open question. So if you're a sophomore in college and you're like, well, should I do this part-time thing that is non-law versus this part-time thing that's law? I would say go with the law thing, both to assure yourself that you're making the right choice and to demonstrate to admissions officers. Okay, one last little tidbit that I'm going to give you that's very technical, kind of in the weeds, about why it might be a little bit harder for a KJD applicant in this process. Your grades are a work in progress. We've seen 3 years of grades if you're applying in the fall of your senior year, and you have still 2 more semesters, 1/4 of your academic career yet to come. If let's say a school has a target median GPA of, let's just say 3.5, and you're at 3.53, the rational admissions officer might think, I don't know what's going to happen in this year. They could very well dip below 3.5 if their grades in their senior year are a little weaker, right? By the same token, someone who's a 3.47 might be able to achieve more than a 3.5. So admissions officers will often wait until you have at least one additional semester of grades, or might want to put you on the wait list and see what happens after you graduate before they decide to admit you, depending on where you are relative to their metrics. So consider that when you are both considering what schools to apply to and thinking about how to highlight your experience. All right, I think that is everything I have to say about that. Now we have the law-related something or other that I have committed to making at the end of each episode. I don't have grammar for you today. I had something picked out. Dustin said, we already talked about that. So I'm obsessed with some grammar things. I just say them over and over. But instead I'm going to talk about a movie that is a law movie that I really recommend. It's called Dark Waters. It's from, I think, 2019, and it stars Mark Ruffalo. And it is about a lawyer in big law in the 90s, and a pro bono case he takes on. And I find it very true to life for what it was like to practice law then. Things have changed a bit, but it's still pretty relevant if you want to be a lawyer. And I highly recommend it. Mr. Deansy, also a lawyer, he really liked it. He didn't like anything at all. He doesn't like anything. So I think that's a really big mark in its favor. Also, it takes place in Cincinnati, and I have spent a lot of time in Cincinnati for work earlier on in my career. I like any movie that shows a place I spend a lot of time in. I think other people feel that way too. But anyway, highly recommend that. And but don't when you then apply to law school say that you were inspired to do so based on a movie or TV show. It just does not reek of serious commitment. So don't do that. All right, that's all I have to say about that. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the notes below or send us an email to law.jd.admissions@umich.edu. As always, thank you also to Dustin for making time. He's super busy right now, so thank you, Dustin. And wherever you go, go blue.